All right. Our next fireside chat is going to be between our very own Professor Aurelien and Representative Nick Begich. Please put your hands together.
Congressman, it's a real pleasure to have you here at the Kennedy Center for BTC in DC. We want to know more about your relationship to Bitcoin. Congress is doing a lot of work on Bitcoin and a lot of discussions, and there's a number of congressmen and congresswomen who've become convinced by Bitcoin, but some have been convinced recently, and that's not your case. You're a rare OG and congressman. So tell us a little bit about your relationship with Bitcoin, how it started, and your journey.
It's a good question. So you're right. I've been attached to Bitcoin for quite some time. I come from a tech background, so my professional experience is in tech prior to joining Congress. I started a software development company about 20 years ago, and so I've always had a natural interest in technology and what it could do. And I was reading a tech blog in late 2012, and it was talking about Bitcoin. It was talking about the upcoming halving. And I said, well, what is this? What is this? And I started to dig a little deeper and a little deeper. And in January of 2013, I decided to start buying some Bitcoin. And I bought some for myself, and I bought some for my business, and I actually had quite a bit of Bitcoin, unfortunately tied up in Mt. Gox. And that was one of the first lessons, not your keys, not your coins. But I have been attached to the space for quite some time. I find it to be a fascinating area of just technology development over the last many years. The blockchain itself is a really interesting piece of technology because up until that point, you'd really seen centralized data architectures. And this is an interesting decentralized data architecture. And I think that's probably one of the things that attracted me to this suite of technologies that we call Bitcoin, was some of the architectural nuances and differences relative to what was available at the time.
That's a great history of Bitcoin and relationship with Bitcoin. So we're in America, of course, and the dollar has been very dominating the global monetary system for quite a while, and even though in the 70s there's been some decouple with gold. How do you see the current state of the global monetary system and this evolution in the next few years as Bitcoin coming as a disruptor and a real force for an alternative?
I think that we see two things happening at the same time, and we often attribute everything to one or the other of these two causes. One, we see a tremendous increase in the amount of fiat that has been produced, whether that be US dollars or Chinese yuan or Japanese yen, you name it. The central banks have been printing capital, right? Printing digital, largely, dollars or other fiat currencies faster than the rate of their domestic growth.
Right.
And when you have that expanding monetary supply, expanding at a rate that's faster than nominal growth in those economies, you get inflation. And during COVID, we saw what can happen, and it's happened throughout history. You see this impulse of governments to expand the monetary base in order to solve, and I'm using air quotes here, solve short-term problems, and they create a lot of long-term disturbances. So that's one of the things that we've seen happening. At the same time, we've seen, in part because of that, a flight to scarcity. And I say a flight to scarcity because we've seen Bitcoin rise tremendously. We all know that. Gold rising tremendously, silver rising tremendously. What do those things have in common? They're scarce. They have the unique property of scarcity. We can talk about the nuances among those assets individually, but as an asset class for a store of value, it really boils down to scarcity. And so you've got the dominant financial system has been anything but scarce, and the alternative financial system has preserved scarcity. And I think those two things in combination are why you're seeing things like gold, silver, and Bitcoin rising relative to fiat so tremendously in the last several years.
And we've seen recently an acceleration in the printing, in the money printing. You mentioned COVID, but this fast, I mean, that accelerate also the rise of the price of Bitcoin because of the acceleration of the money printing. That tells a lot in our society how to solve problems in terms of just money printing and debt creations rather than addressing the real problem.
You know, one of the challenges that I think is being revealed is that when we went off, you mentioned the 70s, when we went off that redemption window where you could take dollars and exchange them for hard asset, gold at that time, right? We went off that redemption window, and governments, not just in the United States, but worldwide, then had sort of a license to print.
Yeah.
There's no consequence to printing in the short term as a government, right? And I think what happened was we lost that tether to discipline.
Yeah.
Because scarcity gives government discipline.
Yeah.
And when you give government a license to print, organizations like Congress or organizations of similar nature in other nations, they're more likely to spend because there's no short-term consequence. And so I think when you lose that tether, math will ultimately retether you to something.
Right.
And I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing the math retether us back to gold, and it's showing up as a rapid increase in price, or tether us back to silver, or tether us back to Bitcoin. Something that's scarce, the market is forcing that function. And I think the way we interpret it oftentimes is, hey, these assets are increasing, but what's really happening is that the fiat is decreasing.
Yeah. And there's a value in scarcity, which is itself a principle for, I mean, households, even any Americans or any citizens know the value of scarcity and balancing budgets in his private finances, and the government doesn't have that discipline, so we lose the value of scarcity as a principle of governing finances, private finances, but also public finances. What does the principle of scarcity force us to think in terms of policies, in terms of expansions, in terms of also foreign policies or dominations? What does it lead to in terms of humility in governments, perhaps?
It's a great question. I think to try to address that, we have to think about a fixed monetary base. Imagine that the United States or even the world had a fixed monetary supply. We see productivity gains every year in the global economy, and on a nominal basis, right? Not an inflation-adjusted basis, but on a nominal basis, those productivity gains may be somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 7% nominally. So when you have inflation, what you're actually seeing is you're seeing the money supply expand faster than the rate of nominal growth. And when you see that, you say, okay, now if we had a fixed monetary supply, what we would experience in reality is deflation. Now, why does that matter? Why does that matter for the real economy? It matters because it actually forces an implicit hurdle rate on investments. So if you're going to make an investment, you're going to make an investment that would return a greater level of capital than you put in, right? Which would be outrunning the nominal growth rate. And so in this sense, I think that a restoration of scarcity actually improves the investment environment to make sure that you have a proper allocation of capital in the private sector.
That's a great point. And it's a selection process for good investments. And the solution is Bitcoin is itself creating this algorithmically, this scarcity. But Bitcoin is not only a global monetary system and global network and global protocol, but it's also very well aligned with American values. If you look at Bitcoin, there's a connection with American values. Can you talk to us a little bit more about this connection?
I think you're 100% right. I mean, one of the things that Bitcoin does is it encodes certain values that, as Americans, I believe we share. And certainly, I believe that our nation was founded upon. The idea of individual liberty, of decentralization, right? Yeah. We currently have a central bank, but I think that our founders were pretty clear up front that they wanted to maximize individual sovereignty, individual liberty. Government was not there to grant us our rights. Government was there to protect the rights that we naturally are provided with as sovereign individuals. And restoration of that individual sovereignty and control over our own property, I think, is something that, as Americans, we share as a common set of values. And Bitcoin helps us do that because it literally codes those values into the monetary system in a way that they can't be usurped by a central authority.
Decentralization is at the core of the American value, like the skepticism toward big governments, but also big corporations, the idea that everybody should have equality of opportunities, and as a founder, as an entrepreneur, you should be part of the market system. And that decentralization protocol is just by design really enabling that. So sometimes we have these antitrust laws in the US that try to decentralize the economy from the late 19th century. Decentralization by enforcement, by state, by coercions, by breaking up sometimes some companies from IBM to AT&T and others. But just antitrust has failed so far to truly decentralize the economy because the enforcement is very limited. At the same time, Bitcoin is decentralization by design. It's designed to be decentralized. It's designed to really empower people. So I think Bitcoin can technologically achieve what laws and policies enforcement are sometimes limited to do.
They've failed to do, and I think if we look at foreign policy, right? If we look at foreign policy over the last 50 to 100 years, post-World War II policy, let's say, draw the line there. The United States has tried to export democratic values, democratic republic values around the world. And we've had degrees of success with that, right? I mean, you can look at post-World War II Germany, post-World War II Japan, a lot of success there, less success in certain areas of the Middle East. But we've tried to do that oftentimes through forcible engagement or persuasion of various gradients. But I think this is probably the better way to export those American values throughout the world. Because I think ultimately, while those values have been adopted by the United States, right, as core values, they're really core values for humanity. Right. And I think the world is a better place when we can encode those values everywhere.
Yeah. And there's one value that is also encoded in Bitcoin, which is the free markets. Nobody truly control the price of Bitcoin. Like, you cannot change the price of Bitcoin by more printing, more buying. It's just supply and demand. And that forces governments to humility and just be bound by the price of Bitcoin because you don't have a power over that price. And these free market values, as you said, perhaps America has tried to export them sometimes, but the best exporter is Bitcoin itself. So free markets is also, in capitalism, is very at the core American values, of the foundations of our nation.
Absolutely. And when you look at the traditional, and I call it traditional, it's really not traditional, but the modern monetary fiat system, and the ability for the government to go out and spend at will. It's really, and hopefully a lot of folks in this room know this already, but it's a backdoor tax on the people that utilize that currency, right? Because it creates inflation. So it creates debt and inflation, and it effectively enslaves that population to pay off that debt with interest. And if they can't do it, then it's their kids and their grandkids that will pay for that debt. And so, the modern monetary fiat system, providing government with a monopoly on money, ultimately is very bad for the people that are being served.
It's not sustainable.
It's completely unsustainable, and I think that there's no better evidence of that than not just the U.S. debt. We have large debt, but look at other nations. Their debt to GDP ratio, like in Japan, is well over 200%. If you look at the total debt in China, it's astronomically higher than that. And you might say, well, yeah, but that's not all government debt. Well, it kind of is when you're dealing with a nation where effectively the state owns the companies.
It's not sustainable. We need a public finance to be in order, and then we have these massive debts, which is the result of the current monetary system. And precisely, perhaps Bitcoin, so as it has been said, will help clear this debt. There's some project in Congress about this strategic Bitcoin reserve. So talk to us a little bit about what your stake in America adopting Bitcoin. Of course, we have Bitcoin from seizures, from a number of investigations that we had, but the idea of actively purchasing Bitcoin, how would that help, and how the benefits?
Yeah, so I think it's important when we think about, let's first talk about reserves, right? In order to have a reserve currency, to my view, you have to have reserves, right? And we have gold reserves in the United States. We have the highest level of gold reserves of any nation on earth, and it equates to roughly 5% of all of the known above ground gold, right? Is held by the U.S. Central Bank. So we have that gold, but we recognize that as an asset class, Bitcoin is growing rapidly. It's consistently in the top 10 of all assets worldwide. It bounces to and from, and sometimes it's ahead of all of the global silver, sometimes it's behind all of the global silver, but it's right there. And so we recognize this as a rising asset class, and I think it's incumbent as a responsible actor to go out and make sure that we have a diverse national balance sheet. And so I'm a believer that we need to diversify our national balance sheet. We've got a heavy emphasis on gold. I think we should have an additional strong emphasis on Bitcoin. So depending on what estimates you subscribe to, there's about 200,000 Bitcoin that the United States government has legally seized and is currently holding. In the past, that's been auctioned off. And I put forward a bill called the Bitcoin Act, along with Senator Lummis, who is a strong champion for Bitcoin specifically, to help encode the idea of a strategic Bitcoin reserve that would hold that Bitcoin long term, at least 20 years, and that would provide us some additional mechanisms to acquire Bitcoin without taxing the citizen. And I think that's really important to recognize.
And without using taxpayers' money.
Without using taxpayer dollars, strictly balance sheet action items. So additional seizures, the way we've done it in the past, legal seizures through illicit activity or other similar things. We do the same thing with vehicles that are seized or dollars that are seized for illicit activity. So we would continue to utilize that as a mechanism, of course. Then also Federal Reserve remittances. So when the Federal Reserve sends a positive remittance to the federal government, there is a level at which we would be able to utilize discretion to acquire Bitcoin with excess reserves sent by the Federal Reserve over to the U.S. Treasury. The Exchange Stabilization Fund is something that is utilized to help stabilize the dollar, and we would add Bitcoin to the list of currencies that could be acquired through the through the Exchange Stabilization Fund. That fund is overfunded by about $40 billion based on our best estimates. And then lastly, we have all that gold on our national balance sheet is marked at about $42 an ounce. It's never been revalued mark to market.
How come? Why?
It's a great question. These are questions I don't have an answer for that question because I'm a freshman congressman. Give me 10 years, I might be able to answer that one. But I would suspect a lot of it boils down to the inefficiency of government generally.
Yeah. It's been solved.
What's that?
It's been solved.
It's been solved. Yeah,
this
right.
efficiency.
Yeah. No, we're still working on it. There's plenty of work to do to make government more efficient. But it has not been mark to market, and it creates an opportunity to perhaps revalue some of that gold on the balance sheet and utilize that as a mechanism to acquire additional balance sheet Bitcoin.
Is there an objective of number of Bitcoins?
There is. The target is 1 million Bitcoin acquired over a 4-year period, less what we already have through seizures.
Right. So that, with projections of Bitcoin's price over the next 10, 20 years, that would be a great help for American debt.
It would be a great help for American debt, and I think one thing people need to recognize is, from my perspective, I view this as an insurance policy.
Yeah.
An insurance policy on the loss of reserve currency status, an insurance policy against an undisciplined Congress, and a mechanism that actually backstops the dollar, right? It can actually become a self-denying prophecy that we have a falling dollar if we have a relevant and strong balance sheet.
Also for the next generations, like you have a stronger America with a stronger, laying upon stronger assets, right? So that would be for, we see those treasury companies acquiring Bitcoin, and that makes the corporation stronger because they have these Bitcoins on the balance sheets, and applying this logic to America, that would be reinforcing the health of the public finances.
It's true, and I think you're touching on something I wanted to mention as well, and that is this idea of, what is the dollar? Is the dollar really a store of value? I'd say no. Because if you put dollars in your mattress for the last 50 years, and you woke up today and tried to spend them, you'd have less than 10% of their original purchasing power. So dollars have been proven not to be a strong store of value in the long term. I think they're a great store of value in the immediate short term, a few weeks, a few months, but over many years, they fail to store value. Bitcoin, gold, silver, other scarce assets, those are the true stores of value for what I call the non-intrinsic stores of value. Right? There's intrinsic stores of value like real estate, but non-intrinsic stores of value cannot be fiat currency, almost by definition.
Like where you don't derive an enjoyment, like you derive an enjoyment from real estate by living in it. You don't derive an enjoyment by Bitcoin. It's still more like holding it, right?
That's right. So it's a separate store of value class, and it's really, and I'll tell you, this is a really important aspect of the conversation I think today is, it's a consensus store of value, right? It's a consensus store of value. So there's no reason why we couldn't use other forms of stores of value, but the world has reached a consensus. And when we talk about the Bitcoin community, what is the Bitcoin community's real objective, or what should it be? I think we need to make sure that we continue as a Bitcoin community to diffuse ownership of Bitcoin throughout the population, because when you do that, you achieve incremental consensus. The more holders you have, the greater the consensus becomes.
The more individuals like
that's right
holding Bitcoin, and that goes through education as well, or orange peeling the world and then trying to explain the value of Bitcoin. And that's where we need also universities and higher education system which can train the next workforce and improve the labor market by training the right people and making sure that they know at least about Bitcoin and they know the values of Bitcoin. So this is a challenge also for university, and GW is up to this challenge.
It is. It's absolutely necessary, and I think underpinning that education when it comes to what is Bitcoin and how does it work, you almost have to start with the economic case, right? And I think a lot of times within the Bitcoin community, and I'll put myself in the community, we approach this as, here's the solution. We walk in, here's the solution. But we don't start by defining the problem. And I think we've really got to make sure that we're defining the problem first in a very clear economic sense, right? That is easily accessible for the general public to understand. And then you can explain why Bitcoin as an asset class solves those set of problems.
That's right.
And people really need to understand that, because a lot of times we'll hear folks in Bitcoin say, hey, this is digital property, it's digital energy, it's these things, and it's those things, but to the uninitiated, to the uneducated, with respect to Bitcoin, they're not there yet. Right. We got to start with what's broken and how does this fix it.
Yeah. But the diffusion of ownership is critical. I had this discussion with Adam Bagg, and we have those treasury companies or also sovereign states who acquire and accumulate Bitcoin at a very rapid pace. And it's almost like a race against time, because if they acquire so much Bitcoin and the price of Bitcoin goes up every day almost, then individuals are buying Bitcoin at a higher price. So that's why we need to also educate individuals to buy Bitcoin, because the earlier, the better for the people. So there's a real need for diffused ownership to keep that ethos of decentralizations very true to Bitcoin.
It's true. I mean, as many will remember who were around the space for a long time, maybe you've heard of this. It used to be a website you could go to and you could just ask for 5 Bitcoin and they'd just be sent to you. They were so cheap, there were people out there who would just send you Bitcoin. And today, of course, that's preposterous. No one's going to do that. But the concept was correct early on, right? The concept was correct early on. I mean, I call it Satoshi dust. We need to Satoshi dust. Make sure everyone's got a little stake in this. And I think it's important. People are. There's growing interest, right? We see this in the polling data that comes back. There's growing interest, not just among the youth, but among experienced investors, among the older generations as well. What is this? Should I add it to my portfolio? Many of you here will know that you have really well-respected financial advisors and financial houses that are suggesting 1 to up to 15% of somebody's portfolio should be in Bitcoin. And these are the same institutions that were rallying against this asset just a few years ago.
Yeah, the mindset has radically changed even since January. When you talk to your colleagues in Congress, those who are pro-Bitcoin and some who are anti-Bitcoin, what kind of discussions do you have with those who are also very skeptical about Bitcoin? Do you see a kind of sea change? Do you see some openness, or it's just...
There's certainly openness, and I think there's a lot of curiosity within Congress. I think one of the challenges that we have as individual members of Congress is that we have to cover everything, right? I mean, we're covering things from healthcare to interest rate policy to monetary systems to global conflict. You name it, it's falling in our wheelhouse, and we have to address it. And I think there's a huge learning curve that has to happen, and everybody's kind of entering the chat at different stages. And so you find yourself, or I find myself, having the same conversation a lot with different members. But what I've found, and this is what we're talking about today, is that if we start with the base case, what's broken, then we can start talking about how do we go about fixing it and why Bitcoin is an appropriate solution to these problems.
But you're a rare case because you were a Bitcoiner before being a congressman, and it's pretty rare, right? Most congressmen and women were not Bitcoiners before, so that's why we need education or advocacy engagements with our elected officials. If you had a message to say to your colleagues in Congress, what would it be, and how can we push forward to this Bitcoin Act, and just in a bipartisan way, because it shouldn't be a one side of the aisle.
Well, and it shouldn't be, and I don't think that it is a one side of the aisle issue. And I'll cite gold as the reason why. Our gold reserves are not a partisan issue. If you were to ask a Democrat or a Republican, hey, should the United States sell off all its gold? The answer is going to be no. The answer is going to be we should not do that for the vast majority of Congress. So why, I think the gap is not that we don't see a value in a reserve. It's really an understanding Bitcoin as a reserve. And when we understand Bitcoin as a reserve, and the urgency that you just put your finger on, right? The urgency of needing to acquire this before other nation-state actors or other treasury companies go out and start acquiring even more of it. You know, that's the key. This is a reserve asset, and it's a reserve asset that has consensus around the world, growing consensus among central banks and treasury companies. That's when you're going to get people's attention.
Well, thank you so much, Representative. It's very great to have you. I think it's great. Thank you very much for being an OG Bitcoiner in Congress and representing the Bitcoin community so well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.